Today's true crime tale revolves around the family of serial killers who ran a guest house to snare their victims with a secret trapdoor until one day they vanished, leaving behind a tale of folklore, conspiracies, and macabre discoveries. So if you're passionate about true crime, mysteries, and the paranormal, you found the ideal place. I am dedicated to delivering fresh content on these topics at least 3 times a week. So if you're intrigued as I am, don't hesitate to tell Donkey Kong to smash the like button and toss a barrel the subscribe button to help us expand our channel's reach. Now without further ado, let's immerse ourselves into today's riveting tale. It's the winter of 1870. A family of four arrived by wagon to the frontier prairie lands of Labette County, Kansas. They called themselves the Bender family, consisting of John Bender, his wife Elvira, and their two children, John Jr. and Kate, said to be of German origin. The family were already well off enough to have registered over 160 acres of land in the county. They built a multi-purpose cabin that included a storefront where they sold goods to locals and travelers, and an inn above their own living quarters, all strategically placed next to the long and winding Osage Trail. It was to provide relief to frontier travelers heading through the last days of the Wild West. They also opened up their dining room for travelers wishing to stop for a hot meal, combining multiple businesses into one dwelling, the American dream. Elvira and Kate created a 2-acre vegetable patch and an apple orchard close to the cabin, the fruits of which they sold to the family shop, and to create special meals for their guests, sometimes their last suppers. The family were unusual because of their belief in spiritualism and their claim to neighbors that they could communicate with the dead. But in 1873, the Benders had murdered at least 11 people using an elaborate trapdoor built into the foundation of the cabin. South Kansas in the 19th century was a bloody place with territory battles, attacked by Indians and Civil War fallout. Many pioneers headed to the trails in Kansas and fought for the right to own part of the land. After the bulk of the Civil War ended in 1865, the U.S. government moved the native Osage Indians out of Labette County to a new territory that would later become known as Oklahoma. The land the Indians were forced from was put up for sale to thousands of homesteaders and farmers. One of these families were the Benders, who appeared to work hard to earn their living like other pioneers in the region. When they arrived, John was 60 and Elvira 55. John was said to have been an intimidating presence, standing over 6 feet tall. I'm about 6 feet tall. No, I'm not. With deep-set black eyes, giving him the nickname of Old Beetle-Browed John. Elvira, who couldn't speak much English, was referred to as the She-Devil due to her unfriendliness and disregard of travelers and locals. It was suspected she had her origins in Germany, but later researchers pointed to her origin being Scandinavian. John Jr. and Kate were in their mid-20s, were considered handsome, and spoke English with an upper-class accent, not common in the area at the time. Kate claimed to be a psychic healer and would offer her services at the Bender cabin, becoming one of the main drawers for travelers. It was known to be John Jr. and Kate who were the faces of the business, with the other two remaining mostly behind the scenes due to them being disliked by the community. So, disliked and act, Elvira was also known as a midnight hag with the soul of a grave-robbing hyena. From 1871, many travelers would stop for a meal or to stock up on supplies for the trip out west through Lafayette County. Many of these were carrying large sums of money due to buying land, stock, or a claim on a section of land being auctioned by the state. Due to the violence of the times, it was not uncommon for people to go missing in the wildlands, which certainly prolonged the Benders' time at the killing machine they had built. Some family members of the missing people traced their loved ones to the cabin, but nothing beyond, and yet suspicions fell, not on the Benders, but of rogue Indians to the west or horse thieves and general villainy. Now in May of 1871, the body of a man called Jones was found in Drum Creek, not too far from where the Benders' cabin sat. Within a few months, 2 more bodies were discovered nearby. All 3 men exhibited the same wounds, having had their skulls crushed and their throats cut. Now in 1872, George Lochner and his daughter were passing through Kansas to Iowa to visit family. When they didn't make it to Iowa, the alarm bells were sounded, as George was known to be carrying a substantial amount of cash. George was well known and had many friends, including Dr. William York, who was a neighbor of his. When York heard they hadn't arrived in Iowa, he took it upon himself to find out what happened, but he too disappeared somewhere in La Bahia County. When York went missing, his brothers formed a search party. One of his brothers was Colonel Alexander York, a Civil War veteran, a lawyer, and member of the Kansas State Senate. He organized 50-strong men search party to scour the route that his brother had taken. Now, in March 1873, the colonel and his party arrived at the Bender cabin. Having traced his brother through Kansas, the Benders claimed that York had indeed stayed with them, but that he had traveled west after only one night. The colonel was convinced he was being told the truth and was persuaded by Kate to stay for dinner. Bad decision. The Benders then cooked dinner for the entire search party and suggested that the Indians were most likely to blame for York's disappearance. 5 days later, the colonel returned to the cabin after he had been told a story of a woman who had escaped the inn after being threatened with a knife by Elvira. Due to her lack of English, John Jr. and Kate dismissed the claims as folly. But Elvira shouted out that the woman who had accused her was actually a witch who deserved to be hanged. The colonel and his party left the cabin but were convinced the family had something to do with his brother's death. The colonel spread the word to neighboring communities that something was amiss, and secrets were being kept by someone in the Osage community. Around the same time, reports of people going missing on the trail were so common that travelers began avoiding the area altogether. This led the Osage community to call a meeting to find out what was going on. And around 80 people made up of locals and business owners turned up to the Harmony Grove Schoolhouse for the meeting, including both Johns. The meeting concluded that a search warrant would be obtained for every homestead and property from Big Hill Creek to Drum Creek, including the Bender's cabin. Now, a few days after that meeting, a farmer was passing the Bender cabin when he noticed that the cattle were unfed, and the farm appeared to be abandoned. Another week passed before a search party turned up the cabin, with Colonel York in tow. When they entered the cabin, the Benders were nowhere to be seen. They had vanished without trace. There was a smell of death coming from every part of the cabin. They found a trapdoor on the floor of the cabin that had been nailed shut. When they opened it, the smell got worse. The team of mostly men managed to lift the entire cabin off the ground and move it to the side so they could dig underneath. They found clotted blood mixed in with the soil, but no bodies. They used metal rods to push it to the ground around the cabin, and within an hour, they found the body of William York in a shallow grave in the vegetable patch. Working through the night and into the morning, the team found another 9 grave sites, 8 bodies in the mud and one in the cabin's well. They also unearthed various body parts. All the victims had their skulls crushed with a hammer and their throats cut, apart from a young girl who had been strangled to death. The site where the bodies was found gave the damning name of Hell's Half Acre. A newspaper report at the time reported that the search team was so angry that they hung a local man known to the Benders from a beam in the inn. They had resuscitated him and hung him again before letting him go, when they realized he knew nothing. When stories of the murders reached every corner of the country, thousands of people flocked to the site. From as far as fields as New York, investigators at the time deduced that the Benders had a plan in place for each of their victims. Each victim was a guest who was beckoned to sit at the dining table in a specific position that was above the trapdoor. The seat was in front of a curtain that separated 2 rooms. With the victims back to the curtain, Kate would distract them with the tales of spirituality. One of the men then quietly pulled back the curtain and smashed the victim over the head with a hammer before cutting their throat. The trapdoor was activated with a lever, and that body would drop into the cellar. They would rob the victims of all their possessions. The victims were then either buried whole or dissected. Though some of the victims were well off and were carrying large amounts of cash with them, others were not, and yet the Benders had still killed them. It was concluded at the time that the Benders had killed for the thrill of killing. but other researchers have claimed that they were performing human sacrifices at the whim of Kate, who may or may not have been a witch herself. Stories emerged of neighbors being threatened with knives, John Sr. walking around with a large hammer, and blood stains on the family's wagon. Many of the stories that came after the Benders left were considered to be only a speculation. A lot of effort was put into tracking down the Benders. That wagon and its malnourished horses were found abandoned 12 miles away near the railroad city of Thayer. As the Benders had left over a week before the search party came knocking, no one would have been looking for them as they caught a train out of Thayer. Detectives traced the train's journey. The family had bought tickets to Humboldt, 22 miles away, but John Jr. and Kate left halfway through the journey at Chanute. From there, they caught a train to Texas, towards an outlaw colony between Texas and New Mexico, where no lawmen dared threat as none had returned alive. John Sr. and Elvira continued on the train to Kansas City and bought tickets for the next train to St. Louis, Missouri. From then, what happened to the Benders remains confined to the pages of folklore, as they had vanished from the faces of the earth. One story suggests that the family had been caught by a group of vigilantes, who burned Kate alive and shot dead the other three, assuming Kate to have been a witch. Another group claimed to have hung them and thrown their bodies in a river, but no one ever claimed the substantial award. The stories have been told over time that claim John Sr. was in fact an immigrant named John Flickinger, but no solid evidence has ever proved it. A man was arrested in Idaho the following year after killing a man with a hammer, but he was never proven to be connected to the Benders' murders. Many people were arrested who were thought to be associated with the Benders, but no link was proven. Despite claims that various people were in fact the Benders, no trace of them was ever truly found. They had simply arrived in Kansas, cash in hand, and built a cabin with a trapdoor purely to ensnare and kill people. And it's that aspect that haunts people a century and a half later. They knew before they built the cabin they were going to kill. And now modern-day interpretations of the story suggest the Benders had killed before and moved to Kansas to set up a new death site. Bones found at the site suggest that the family had killed at least 24 people, more than the official 11 that they had linked with. The cabin was destroyed within days by souvenir hunters who took everything, including the wood of the trapdoor and the stones from the cellar wall. Some of the pieces of the cabin, including the hammer used in the murders, were put on display in a museum in 1967. No one truly knows who the Benders were or where they ended up. Their motives remain confined to the history books. Maybe descendants of the Benders live on to this day, unaware of their grim heritage, or maybe they were caught by vigilantes and killed. The land would forever be known as Hell's Half Acre, and is said to be haunted. The little slaughterhouse on the prairie and the story of the Bloody Benders continues to fascinate and intrigue to this day. That concludes today's episode. If you found today's story enjoyable and informative, please take a moment to click the like button, and make sure to ask Donkey Kong to subscribe to my channel and enable all notifications so you never miss any upcoming content. Your support is greatly appreciated. Until next time, take care, and I'll see you soon.